Welcome everybody that's joining us live on Facebook and through the link and with Benchmark. I'm Jodi Bronchtein. I'm an advanced sommelier. I am the sommelier at Press Napa Valley, one of them. And we are here in this gorgeous room because everybody really likes this map. And we know that from the last time we did this Raid Your Cellar or Our Cellar. So we've got a map so we can talk about Rutherford. Thank you for being here. Benchmark Wine Group's Raid Your Cellars virtual tasting series was born from the desire to bring people of all backgrounds together around a virtual table to chat about their passion for wine. We know this, you've seen these before, and we're happy to be here today with Napa Valley Live with Shannon Staglin and Artie Johnson. And we are live and we are super excited to have them. So we have got 3 wines here and we're gonna talk about them, and we are gonna talk about why they were made and what they taste like, and food pairings, what's going on in Napa, how we're doing individually, and we're just gonna chat because I know these people and we're across town from each other. We really should have gotten in the same place, but then the mask issue. Okay, so the first wine that I have in my glass here is, Artie, can you introduce it while I hold it up?
Yes, for sure. So I have a project called Artishasic, and Artishasic is a combination of my children and my wife's name. So Artie is my son. He's 3. He's named after my father. He's the 3rd. My wife, Shannon Staglin, and my daughter, Cicely, who is 4 years old. So Artishasic is a project where I make the wines. Most of the wines are 100 to 150 cases. So very small production. I specialize in Rosé, Chardonnay, Syrah, and Carignan. So that gives you kind of an outlook of the project. And today, you have the, what I call the La Mer Chardonnay, which is from Santa Rita Hills. And that's actually a single vineyard wine, but I don't put the vineyard on the bottle. The site is about 8 miles from the ocean. And one kind of unique, interesting thing this year is I pulled a little bit to make sparkling wine.
What?
So I was the first pick in that vineyard, but the last pick for Chardonnay. So there's something interesting that I would pick first for sparkling and last for Chardonnay. That's the La Mer you have in your glass.
So real quick, before we move on to talking about La Mer, obviously you're gonna make that available to Press Napa Valley, correct?
Absolutely.
Just want to be first. I just trying to be first for that. I mean, if we have a super small production on this, I can't imagine what the production is gonna be on the sparkling. So Santa Rita Hills is a really special place, and I don't want to get too nerdy here, but Santa Rita Hills is important because you have the transverse valleys. So when you say it's 8 miles away from the ocean, it's not 8 miles parallel. It's like the ocean is here, and then these transverse valleys are pulling in all that cool air. And that's the cool thing about Santa Rita Hills. Very few places in the world have these transverse valleys. So I'm guessing that's why you called it La Mer. Can you speak more to that? Because I can smell salinity on this.
Absolutely. La Mer, you know, the sea in French, it's all about that influence. So for me, typically, I like to be in very, very cool areas, but I don't really make skinny Chardonnay. So that's kind of the juxtaposition. A lot of times, if you're in a cooler area and you pick early, you'll have something with a lot of present acidity. For me, I like the acidity to be the backdrop for the texture. So that may have something to do with why I picked last in that vineyard. But as you can see, the wine is still very bright. It has the salinity element there to it. And I like freshness and richness at the same time. I think that's the hardest thing to achieve in terms of Chardonnay, because I like both sides of the spectrum. You know, I could drink Blanc Clément, Cerritos, and HDV, but I could also drink Marcassin and Kistler and Aubert and Kongsgaard. I think you have to find your own balance within the terroir. I just prefer to work with more coastal terroir because I know I'm going to have lower pHs and higher acidity. So that gives me a broader window in which I can paint the wine in.
Okay, I want to talk about that real quick because maybe a lot of people don't know that term, but it's super important. And sometimes you'll get a wine label and it'll have a million numbers on the back. And that's not for the average consumer. That's for me and you who's going to completely nerd out on it. So when the pH is lower, it means that the presence of brightness and acidity is higher, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And I think if, you know, for me, balance is that you can get all of these things together and the whole is greater than the parts, right? Yeah. You know, if you have a cheeseburger and you have lettuce and tomato and bread and cheese and all this stuff, like it should taste like a burger. It shouldn't taste like cheese or tomatoes. So it's the same with wine. Like it shouldn't taste, for me, like acid or oak or any of these things. All of those things should be in balance in their own. And it doesn't mean that all great Chardonnay comes from cold regions or this type of soil or this type of clone. As the winemaker, you really have to find that balance within that terroir. And I think you can see here that, you know, I'm really going for the brightness, but there's a ton of texture in that wine as well.
This is
burger analogy is a good one because he likes a good burger.
I was waiting for like the bacon part and the grilled onions. Like I had a lot more stuff I wanted on that burger, but I get your point. So I hope everybody has this in their glass, but if you do not, let's do some tasting notes, because we definitely want to hear about the winemaking style, but you've sort of addressed it in the sense, when you're talking about balance, you already have like the product. You've got the terroir, you're by the ocean, you've got those valleys pulling in that like air. So you can pick later because you're already getting that brightness. So then once you have beautiful grapes in the vineyard, because all winemaking starts in the vineyard. We all know that, right? Or allegedly, I'm not a winemaker, but that's what I've been told. But then how did you get this? Because literally it is exactly that. It's bright, it's fresh, it's crisp, but once you get past that and it hits your palate at the beginning, it broadens out and it gets a little bit richer, and then it cleans up after itself as it sits on your palate for 10 seconds. And it is really hard to do that. You either have like Chablis, where you're like, it hurts back here a little, it's so bright. Or you have like, this would be a good pairing with buttered popcorn. This is neither and both. It's a beautiful balance. How do you do that in the winemaking?
Well, I think you have to look at the project as a whole, and I look at each wine as a whole. So you really start with the site. What's the site giving you? These are oceanic sedimentary soils. What's the clone, Dijon 96? What's the influence of the site during the growing season? A lot of like really cold Pacific influence. And then I think about the winemaking process. Like, what is fermentation going to be like? What's the élevage going to be like in terms of oak regimen? And then also your bottle regimen. I mean, how long are you going to hold on to it? I mean, that wine is delicious now, but I feel like it's going to age very well. So if you look at all those things together, you're trying to find balance within those things. I think if you fixate on one thing, it's going to be hard for you to make a great wine that's balanced, because there's all these elements. You know, I always say the analogy of like the big Dr. Dre, you know, soundboard that he's using, you know, all those buttons you're pushing, and that's what winemaking is about. So with this, you know, I have friends that make beautiful wines in this exact site who are very accomplished winemakers, and their wines are leaner and a little bit more austere, but they're so delicious. So I think one of the things we get confused about as winemakers is, you know, there's not just one way to get somewhere, but you do have to know the direction that you're going, because if not, you end up with a wine that's very confusing. And I think the one thing I would like you to take from that wine is it's very focused. So if you're going to make a focused wine, you have to have a focused process. There's no way to get to a focused wine without a focused process.
And I feel like a lot of people don't know that. I feel like it's either like you hear things like, well, it starts in the vineyard, and then I think it's one of two things, and this is just my opinion. When I started off in wine, I thought, okay, so then the wine just makes itself. If it starts in the vineyard, they just like crush it and they leave it alone and sing it a song and then bottle it. That's not true. And then there are some wines that, you know, are like, wait, how are you getting this from this place? And why is it alcohol, this and that? And maybe there's some makeup on this. That doesn't seem to be the case with this. This is focused. It is linear and bright and beautiful. If I don't think that you can see what I see. So David Parker, if he talked about the wine, and I was going to do some tasting notes too, but this one is really great. David Parker says that the Chardonnay is beautifully clean and bright, very light touch with oak. The fruit really sings much like a Grand Cru Chablis, but maybe with a touch of saltiness like a coastal Vermentino.
Awesome. Yeah, that's pretty special interpretation of that wine, you know, and I think I tend to steer away from tasting notes because I like my clients to really interpret the wines for themselves. I think sometimes tasting notes can put things in your head, but when I listen to that description, I realize that that's someone that tastes a lot of wine and also enjoys wine, because those two kind of, the saltiness, the cleanliness, the Vermentino element. I mean, that's what makes wine special. And And one thing I have to say is I drink a lot of like California Chardonnay. I also drink a lot of white Burgundy, but I never try to emulate anything. I think that's when you get in trouble. You have to, you have to interpret the site for yourself. And I think there's a lot of like, you know, kind of, oh, I make wines like this or wines like that producer. I think you have to have the freedom to do what you do, and then you can come out with something that's pretty special.
And that's also the special part about making wines in the United States is you do have the freedom to do that. Just a little shout out for some New World wineness. Real fast though, we have a question for you from Lynn, who is wants to ask you live. Can we go ahead and Dylan, yay, Dylan, perfect.
Yes.
So Dylan Proctor, I don't know if you know him, big fan,
Proctor.
Fellow Gemini, would like to ask you a question. Dylan, are you there?
You're on mute, D, or somebody has to unmute him.
Okay.
I think that picture might be in our caves too.
Dylan Proctor, we gotta, if we get him unmuted, this would be spectacular.
I know, so I am not the one to do it. Let's see. Michelle, instead read his question. Okay, I'm not sure we can get it. Okay, great.
Okay.
So we're gonna wait for that question to come in and we'll do that. But while we're waiting for his question, I also wanted to point out with La Mer, I feel like you're exactly right, by letting your client, by letting your guests at a restaurant sort of figure it out on their own, because you do, like when somebody asks me for, hey, what's the difference between these 5 cabs on the list? When I have the time, I absolutely go and I pour 1 or 2. And the first thing they do is, what is this? Because they want to know if they should like it. And I never do that. I'm like, all you're going to tell me is if it has not enough of something or too much of something. And we're going to get you to where you want to be. But people get so freaked out about like having the right answer. And the right answer is the mood you're in, the temperature the wine's in, what food you're eating, like your price point. And, you know, our job is to sort of marry those things. I think there's enough tasting note on here with La Mer that already I'm like, okay, you know, that's telling me what I need to know. Okay, we got a question here. Okay. Artie, do you consider yourself Burgundian, New California, or what California Chardonnay was aiming for in the 60s? Dylan Proctor question.
Dylan's like my brother. Hello, Dylan. How are you? An amazing professional, Dylan, and also a great supporter of my wines from the beginning. So thank you for that. I think in terms of Burgundy, we have to leave that to the Burgundians. They're working with a totally different kind of terroir. I think really what they're working with is not just a high level of acidity, but also a very long, slow growing season. So they're able to achieve different flavors for longer periods of time, whereas our growing season moves pretty quickly because we're in California. In terms of New California, I liked that movement. And I think you might be referring to kind of like the IPOB and the, you know, pursuit of balance and that kind of thing. I think that was a cool movement because it got people talking about what is balance, and maybe we've taken it a little too far in the new world, but I think I identify with the third part of that more, what they're trying to do in the 60s with Chardonnay. And a lot of that has to do with some of my mentors who are making wines back then. Jim Clendenin at Alban Clément is a great family friend of ours and someone that has taken time with me. And one thing I'll say about Jim is when I first started making wines, I emailed Jim Clendenin and Bob Lindquist, like 7 or 8 different questions. And within like 5 or 6 hours, I received 3 to 4 pages from each one of them. And I'll never forget that because, you know, those winemakers are reaching back to younger, newer winemakers like myself. And that mentorship is very important. So I think what they were trying to achieve back then is to have California terroir respected for them. You know, they were doing some Burgundy varieties back then, but that's all I'm looking to achieve. I want someone to say, you know what, Artie, this Chardonnay is really delicious. Whether you drink California Chardonnay, Oregon Chardonnay, or Burgundy, I was able to bring a beautiful interpretation of California Chardonnay to the table. So I think that's what they were trying to do back then. They were trying to make the best wines they could with the terroir they had that could be internationally recognized. So that's kind of where I would put myself and my mission in there.
Got it. Well, I think you answered the question for sure. And I want to talk about family a little bit later, but I feel like the fact that a lot of people don't realize that I think things like that happen here in California all the time, where you asked questions and with no dog in the fight, with like, why would somebody help somebody up and coming when that could potentially threaten their income revenue? A lot of that doesn't happen here. And the stories that I've heard and I've been hearing since coming to the Valley and moving here and working here are that kind of collaborative. Everybody's sort of helping get a step up. And we didn't talk about this, but I'm going to point it out. Last year, there was a harvest party at Staglin, and I went to it, and there were all these tanker trucks coming in. And I asked Amber, who works at Staglin, a good friend. I said, what is all that? She's like, oh, it's from Sonoma. You know, there were some fire issues there, so they're storing their wine in our cobs. And I just was like, people don't get to hear stuff like this because nobody wants to be like, look what we're doing, but it happens all the time. We'll have two winemakers in the same building. It happened last week. And I said, oh, well, you know, Chuck's out there. And this winemaker that on his own married is amazing goes, you know, Chuck started me off. He let me make my wines there. Nobody has any idea about how much of that stuff happens. So when you say that they responded to you, I don't know if that happens anywhere else as much as it does here. I really like, Napa definitely gets a shout out for that. You don't hear the same kind of stories in other places. So those mentors and the community here, and then I want to talk about family when we talk about your, the next wine, Shannon, but can you talk about Artie just a little bit? I know we're trying this beautiful Chardonnay. What do you want? What do you want? You're cooking dinner. What are you cooking with this? I want 3 of your best pairings because you're the winemaker. I can make them up because I'm a consumer here at this point, but like, what are you doing with this?
I mean, I think something simple, just like lovely crackers with like a brie, like triple cream cheese, like delicious snack while you're cooking dinner and drinking the wine. Yeah. Let's see. What did we made, his friend, he was out fishing, and when he got back, he caught fish, but when he got back on the dock, there was a guy that had caught a black cod. And so he bought this black cod from the guy on the dock. And so we did the kind of Nobu, like miso marinated black cod. So like the fattiness and the richness of the fish cut by the brightness and linearity of this wine, I think goes really well. And then let's see, the last one, I mean, you said popcorn, like nothing's better than Chardonnay and popcorn. So.
There we go.
I mean, but legitimately drinking this, and I don't know how many people, I know that there was a push that went out to like buy the 3 wines, like get ahead of this and drink it during this panel. But also, I hope everybody knows that you can still do that. Like sometimes I need a little build up. I want to hear you talk about the wines before I'm buying anything. But I'm a really like doubting consumer. But I want to tell you that this is the first time I've ever had your Chardonnay. Is right now, and it is beautiful. Like there are 15 things that I want to like. If I went to Whole Foods after this, we'd be in a lot of trouble monetarily. There's like I want seared scallops with this. I want lemon beurre blanc. I want brightness and richness, and I want to like be contemplative with this wine. You notice I'm drinking it and I'm spitting because I want to make sure I get through the whole seminar and give the wines equal due, but like it just keeps refreshing your palate. But I am desperate for food right now. Like I want Delice de Bourgogne. That would be dinner. It would be a bottle of this and some cheese. And I don't think that's a balanced diet, but it would be.
Wine country diet.
And also a rich roasted chicken. Oh, absolutely. With the lemon slices underneath the crispy skin. Listen.
You know, Jodi, making Chardonnay is something that I enjoy quite a bit. You know, there's a lot of pressure because there's some good Chardonnay in this family, the Staglin Chardonnay. And my mother-in-law is a big connoisseur of Chardonnay. So in the back of my head, I can always see her and hear her voice when I'm making these wines. So when you start making wines, you know, and you marry into a family like this, there's a little extra added pressure to make sure that there's great quality in the glass.
I have no doubt. I have no doubt that Sherry would let you know how she feels immediately. They were in here. I told you she was in here a couple days ago. Your mother and father-in-law with another winemaker, and they drank Chardonnay, and she loved it. And I was thrilled that she loved it because I know the same thing, that she's a big fan. And
Yes.
you don't want to, I don't want her to be disappointed with anything that I put in her glass, ever.
Her nickname is Sherry Chardonnay, so, you know.
Well, and also if we can, I don't know if everybody knows this, but there's not a lot of Chardonnay coming from a Rutherford vineyard. In fact, if I'm right, I believe that the only one, isn't it from Staglin? Rutherford Chardonnay?
One more, El Molino.
Oh, well, high five. Yeah, that's the company that you're trying to be like, that's, yes.
Their wines are beautiful too.
Absolutely. Okay, so El Molino and Staglin, you've learned something in case you have a wine Jeopardy competition at your house. Those are the two Napa OG deliciousness producing Chardonnay from Rutherford, because Rutherford bench, why would you just not do a bunch of Cabernet? Well, it's because it's a labor of love, because you could make a lot more money doing Cab, but you're not. And there's a reason for that. Kind of like Mary's Block, Spotswood, same thing in St. Helena.
Yeah.
She didn't like Cab. She drank Sauvignon Blanc, and that Sauvignon Blanc is delicious. So,
yeah.
Okay. So what else do you want to say about your Chardonnay before we move on to a wine I am super excited about, which is the next wine as well? And how do people get this? On Benchmark, but what else is coming for you? Can we talk about the sparkling Atene? See that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's a long ways away, because first you have to kind of make the decision, and then, you know, I'm going to do some Blanc de Blanc, which will probably be 48 months in barrel. I'm going to do some Rosé, which in bottle, pardon me. Probably going to do some Rosé, which will be about 24 months. But I think every year I try to do something to learn more. You know, I think you have to keep yourself interested as a winemaker, and you also have to continue to push forward. The challenge is you don't want to be like super confusing to your client base. So I'm in the process of creating a couple of other little small brands, so we don't jam everything into the same brand. But one thing I want to say, and I'd like to get my wife talking about Resa, is that my wife was extremely supportive when I decided to start Artishasic. You know, I moved to Napa after we started dating, and I was working at Harlan Estate, and then moved to the My Commerce project. And I told my wife, hey, I want to make some wine, you know, and I think to have a partner that's very supportive of that, because, you know, making wine is not all about tastings and Zoom calls and everything. There's an element to it that's very challenging, because you have a business to run. So, you know, your partner has to be on board with the fact that, you know, there's going to be a lot of invoices stacked up in the living room on the dresser. There's going to be some stressful times.
Barrels in your garage.
Sometimes barrels go to your garage for a day before you can take them to the crush facility. But Shannon's been extremely supportive, and I think she's watched her parents be supportive of each other in this business for so many years. So as a newer winemaker, I'm grateful to have that support, because it gives me a lot of confidence. She believes in me, and I think that translates into the quality of the wines in the glass.
Well,
I would just add one other thing, like, that is unique about Artie and his project and his wines, is that, you know, like, there's that guy that like plays the drum, and then he like has a guitar in his front and a harmonica, and like he's the one-man band. Like, that's Artie. Like, Artie does everything from A to Z. So he you know, he sends out the bills, he pays the bills, he drives the truck down to Santa Barbara and is like hopped up on the, you know, on the tractor, like sorting through the clusters with the guys at 3 a.m. and then back in his truck driving back the fruit to Napa. So, you know, and then he's making the wine, and he's at a custom crush facility. So he's kind of making wine against challenging situations often. And so, you know, he is like a one-man show, and he says sometimes like, this is our family project, but I can't take credit for it. Like, he really does it all. So.
Well, Artie, this is delicious. I've had your rosé before, and I'm a huge fan of the rosé. And I met you when you were at Maya Commerce, my very first trip out here with Som Camp in 2014, about literally 6 years ago, I think, like this week actually. So, and all I remember from that time was just like the hospitality and the level of collaboration that you had, you and Jimmy and everything else, and how it's nice that you worked for Harlan and Maya Commerce. Like, you have all of these tools in your toolbox to go by, and you're looking at all this history. And the best wine I've had this year is a 1977 Maya Commerce Chardonnay. Is it acidified? No one cares. That is the most delicious. Like, literally. Ooh, it really?
Yeah.
Oh God, I just sold it. Sorry, we need more. Kathy Cohn, help. Okay. Thank you so much for this. Honestly, this is delicious. I'm buying this. and I'm a mean wine buyer.
Thank you.
I want this in my house.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
And I'm not a good liar, so I mean it. Okay, second wine, and I have to be honest with everybody. I had this once before with Amber Minya from Staglin. She poured this for me. I don't think she told me what it was, and I was like, how do I get that in this restaurant? This is delicious. So this is Resa, and can you introduce your wine, please?
Yes, yeah. So Resa means journey in Swedish. So it is a Swedish word, and this is a kind of collaboration or project that I'm doing with Frederick Johansson, who has been our winemaker here at Staglin since 2007. And in addition to us working together, we're also very, very good friends. And so we hang out and, you know, make dinners on the weekends. His wife is Carissa Mondavi. And I either say he hates me or loves me on any given day because I set them up. And they very quickly got engaged and then married after that. So, but it's a small valley, right? So
listen, if you're just tuning in now, I wanted to just say, welcome to our live Facebook viewers. We are talking about community and family, and like you can't get any more community and family than you introduced the winemaker of Staglin, Carissa Mondavi, who I've never heard of anything having to do with the Mondavi family. So, you know, just a random person in life. And now you guys are making wine together. Like, it's welcome. If you've just joined us, we're trying Resa, and she's talking about the collaboration between you and Frederick. Resa,
yes.
am I saying it right? Journey.
Well, I mean, I say Resa, but in Swedish it's like Resa or something like that. So I don't speak Swedish. You can say it however you like.
I want to say it the way you say it.
So this is a 2016 Grenache. It's 100% Grenache. And this is a project that kind of came out of Frederick's and my, I guess, affinity or love towards like medium-bodied red wines. We love the wines that we produce here at Staglin Family Vineyard, but, you know, wanted to kind of do something a little bit different, something that was, would allow us to kind of express not only our, you know, many, many years of experience in this industry, but also kind of our age, our more youthful side to what we do on a daily basis. And it's a super small project. So this bottling is like 100 cases. We also do a Pinot Noir under this label. So the first vintage of the Grenache was 2013. And the Grenache comes from Sonoma Valley, and it's farmed by our good friend Phil Katuri. So it's an organic estate property. And he also farms Mayacamas. So, you know, taking it full circle. And we bring this wine in, we do a small amount of stem inclusion and age it in large format neutral barrels for about 18-ish months. So
can you talk about, okay, well, let's talk about the wine for a second, but I want to talk about stem inclusion, because we all can nerd out on this topic, but I also feel like it's really important for people that are drinking it to know what that is. And for me, as a young somm, one of the first things that I could notice in a wine was like, ooh, the tannins are different here, but they're not aggressive, but I like what's happening here. And that was always stem inclusion. So on the nose for this wine, and I really like, I know I've said this before, and if you don't have the wines in front of you, there's nothing you can do about it for this first showing, but I really wish that I hope you have your face in a glass right now. I love medium-bodied reds as well. I love them. They're my favorites. And we're gonna do a cab in a minute, and I'd love to start with white, but for reds, I am so much more a medium body, and I just know on the nose, like this is something that I haven't even tasted it yet. So this is bright fruit, like just ripe, red and black. It is super fragrant. This is tiny, super fragrant violets. This is, for me, there's like a little spice element that might be the stem inclusion. There's a little pepper here. There's some star anise. I always get licorice. I always get star anise with Grenache, and it's actually my favorite thing to smell. But this, you could keep your face in the glass forever. Can you tell me about Grenache and aromatics and how you're making this?
Yeah, so I think that Grenache can be kind of like what Artie was talking about with Chardonnay, right? Like there's spectrums, right? There's super lean or there's super big. And what Frederick and I are trying to do with the expression of the varietal of Grenache or the expression of the varietal of Pinot is like the Goldilocks, right? Kind of like what's just right. It's not too lean, it's not too extracted. It shows the finesse, the beauty. It's got lovely kind of mouth texture, mouthfeel, and palate, great finish. But this wine, like 2013, this is a 16, right? The 2013, the first vintage. A lot of people don't think we should be aging Grenache. Like that wine is killer right now. It's so good. So kind of like a great Cabernet, right? The more time it spends in the bottle, the more calm kind of the tannin structure gets calm. It calms that ripe kind of initial youth fruit character, and the more subtle kind of savory components start to come through. And I think you get that with Grenache as well, for sure. Grenache can be known for strawberries. As this wine ages, I get violet notes and things like that. I think stem inclusion is one of those things. Again, it's like the Goldilocks. Like I don't like it if it's too much, right? And if it's not enough, I'll probably be okay with it. But maybe you're missing some sort of more subtle character and nuance that you could be enhancing the wine with.
Right. I feel like anything that you do to wine is giving it something, or anything you don't do, you're making a decision either way, whether to do something or not. So Grenache, I think people start off, when you start off in wine, like Grenache was my go-to, because I read once, and this is not pejorative, that Grenache is the golden retriever of grapes. You just like, literally, who tries Grenache and goes, no, absolutely not. This is offensive to my palate. Like, you're going to find something that you like in Grenache. But because of that, you're right. I feel like sometimes people make Grenache and it can be a little simplistic in the sense that you're like, okay, fruit. And now what? Like, great, you're attractive, but do you have something to talk about? Are you nice to people? Do you tip your waitstaff appropriately? And in terms of wine, like, what's making this complex? This actually, it's got that beautiful fruit up front, but there's something else going on in here, and that is the stem inclusion. And so if we can just talk about that a skosh more, because I know I interrupted you and we forgot about it. When you have stem inclusion, those are, you're leaving it in there, and what it's doing is what? It's adding what? It's tannin, but in a different way. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so you generally want your stems to be lignified if you're going to be doing stem inclusion. If you have really kind of like, less ripe fruit and bright green stems, that's the expression that's going to be introduced into the wine. So you want to have lignified stems. It helps with like in Europe, they use it a lot to kind of help provide body and is it pH? Is that right, honey?
Yeah,
like,
elevates the pH, which also gives like a richer mouthfeel. Stems, I work with them on the Syrahs, and, they can bring a beautiful, like, aromatic lift. They increase the pH of the wine, which gives a broader kind of mouthfeel. You have to be very careful, though, because as Shannon was talking about whether the stems are lignified, there's a lot of other factors, too. Like, is there irrigation in the vineyard? Like, is it a warm site? Is it a late ripening site? Mm-hmm. Because you're trying to gauge, like, whether those stems will give you, like, beautiful like cinnamon, or is it going to be like green notes? And there's a very fine line there. And then you also think about the duration of the fermentation, because if you are on those stems too long, now you're possibly going to get some really intense tannins. So how long should that fermentation be? And then the final thing, which Grenache has a good kind of berry to stem ratio, because it typically has bigger berries. So if you're going to do some whole cluster, there's a greater ratio of that flesh to the stem. Whereas, if you have like Pinot Noir, you think about it, the berry to stem ratio is a lot less. So these are all things that you basically have to be in tune with the farming. You can't start using stems if you don't know anything about the farming, because more often than not, you could step in a big landmine. And I think Frederick and Shannon have done a great job here of just finding the middle, right? Sometimes like completely destemmed Grenache is kind of like too juicy and viscous. And then if you have, too many stems, now we're kind of missing like the site character and the fruit. We're just getting stems. So they've done a great job of finding the middle here.
No, completely. And the way that comes across when you say lignify, so like, see, just for the audience, seeds lignify too. So a lot of people think, oh, okay, well then when grapes are ripe, then that's it. That's the decision you have to make, but that's not the truth, because so much of your flavor is coming from the skins. But also if you get those, if the seeds are green and not brown, means they haven't lignified. And it's the same thing with the stems. So a lot of people don't think that stems are part of what you get, but you get a lot. I mean, you're talking about like, there's yeast on there, there's flavor, there's tannin. And if those stems are green, it tends to come across as a little bitter and aggressive. And that's not what you want with Grenache, which is fairly friendly. So if you have a friendly, like fruity wine with bitter green notes in it, that's not going to be a cohesive wine, and it won't be. Did I say that nicely with my face? Did you want that? So we have a note from David Parker again. He said that he gets on this complex red fruit with exotic oriental spice with a little richness, some wet wool. Wants to know what your yeast is on here. Do you use wild yeast or Davis clone yeast?
We don't inoculate, so it's the native yeast that does the fermentation.
I really want to know about that in life.
It's an Alban clone.
Okay.
Yeah.
So no, literally in life. So what does that mean for the regular audience? Okay, here's what it means. You go into your house after a long vacation and you can smell your house. You're like, oh, this is what my house smells like. Or you pick up your husband's coat and you know where it is because you can smell your husband on that coat. That's indigenous yeast. Like everybody has their own smell or vibe or ethos. And indigenous yeast it happens naturally on the grapes, but it's also like, if you've ever been to a winery in Spain, like Our Lopez de Heredia, those yeasts have been in there since, 1895. And you can tell. And Our Lopez de Heredia tastes like Our Lopez de Heredia every day of the week, every vintage, tomorrow, open, corked, all of it. Same thing. So indigenous yeast is, you're letting what's happening on the grapes itself ferment the wine. And there's dangers to that. It's much easier to go, okay, we got this yeast, we're going to put it in, fermentation's happening, everything's great, move along. Indigenous yeast can be a problem because they can stop working. And then that's your whole year of, I'm trying to make it for the layperson, so I hope I don't sound ridiculous.
No.
Indigenous yeast is a risk, but I feel like I can always tell when it's used because it's just more interesting. Mm-hmm. It's not cultivated. It's like ramps. It's like truffles. You can't cultivate a ramp. You have one or you don't. Mm-hmm. And it does something different to a dish. Indigenous yeast for me does something different to the wine, and people will fight me and I will win. So, so Shannon, you've been making this since 2013 with Frederick. What is your favorite part about this wine? Because I literally can still taste it. I haven't taken a sip in probably 4 minutes, and the finish on this is just like, it's just coasting beautifully.
The wines are like, Carissa likes to describe them as like dangerously drinkable. Okay, so like we were having dinner recently and we wanted to taste a bunch of the vintages, and I think we had like 4 bottles or something, and between the 4 of us, we had some wine before that, but we easily finished all 4 bottles. So I don't know if that's saying something about us or about the wine, but it's got a velvety texture, but also acidity, great balance. And so it's something that you can, really enjoy with food. You can drink on its own, but you definitely will finish the bottle.
What do you want with this? Because I'm going to say what I want with this, but right now we're all drinking this wine. What do you want to cook with this? Where do you want this?
Well, you have to ask Artie that question because I answered the Chardonnay question.
Artie, that's right. That makes sense. That's how we're going to do it. You pick for her wine now.
I knew that was coming my way, so I got a head start.
I'm ready too.
I mean, Jodi, I'm gonna say you're amazing on the floor and what you're doing as a sommelier, and you know that I used to do that for a career. So, being old school, I never want the wine to overpower the food. So I think about, I love game. Like my wife said, I like to fish. I don't do a lot of hunting, but I do like the spoils of the hunting. So I love thinking about venison, about duck, about partridge, because there's a wild element that we don't have cultivated on our palate because we don't have those items very often. So whenever there's nuances, gamey nuances in the wine, I want to pair it with that. So I'm thinking about game and wild game. Also too, like, I think about pork loin. That's like a really hard thing to pair with because
I should have gone first because that was mine. Mine was pork loin with any sort of compote-y deliciousness with like thyme to get that garrigue back in there. Like I want this with a standing rib roast with like a cherry, like a Morello cherry, delicious num num. And I don't even want anybody with me. I just want it myself.
There's a lot of structure. There's a lot of structure in this wine, which I think makes it special because the fruit, you know, you're going to get the fruit with Grenache as long as you handle it correctly, but it's the structure that's going to add the 3D element to the wine. So that's where I would lean towards like the loin and the game. Perfect.
We actually have a question and he wants to ask it live. So Dave has a question. Hopefully this one will work patching him in. Dave, are you there? No, let him ask. All right. All right. Well, we'll come back to that in a second. Hopefully it'll come up.
We see his question though.
Well, I don't have it yet. It wants to ask it live. Okay, 1 second. Dave, are you there?
I think I am. Can you hear me?
Hey, yes, we can hear you. What's your question?
The voice from the distance. Artie, tell me about your thoughts in working with Grenache relative to Châteauneuf-du-Pape. Are you working toward that sort of earthy horse sweat character that some people love and some people don't? Do you feel a cleaner expression is appropriate for the American palate? Now, what do you think about this being my my family wine for Thanksgiving?
Well, you know, first I'm gonna say that you have a great palate because I'm looking at the way you're describing these wines, but I'm gonna tee this up for my wife because the Resa wines are made by Frederick and Shannon. But I do get to drink them quite a bit as a husband. And I'm also going to tee her up because when you said horse sweat and leather, for me, that sounds like Brettanomyces. And I know it's one thing my wife doesn't like is that Brett. So go ahead, Shannon.
Shannon, to you, yes.
Yeah, I'm super sensitive to Brett in wines. And so like, I can enjoy certain wines as long as it's very minimal. But yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't know if my palate is the American palate, but we want to make wines that we enjoy drinking and, can really stand behind. Also, these wines are made in the cellar at Staglin. So we keep the cellar super clean. Frederick is really, really meticulous about that. And so we would never want that bacteria to start to form in the facility. So we do everything to try and keep it out. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely some amazing wines and very well-renowned wines of the world that have Brettanomyces, but definitely something I wouldn't want in the Resa, Grenache, or Pinot Noir for that matter, or Staglin Cabernet.
Okay, so my Thanksgiving question, this seems like the perfect rich wine with, I like to smoke a turkey and then, all the sides, the sweet potatoes and the dressing and the cranberries and you name it. This just seems to be the perfect wine. There used to be Sansons that would do it, but this does it better.
Yeah, I mean, like what pairs best? The whole meal, right? Like, so that sounds delicious. I agree. And I'm looking forward, we were talking about, what is your favorite Thanksgiving, like favorite food of Thanksgiving? And my answer was, I like it all. I like it all together on my plate. So.
True. But also, ham is really hard to pair. And I grew up in the South and you always have a ham on Thanksgiving as well as a turkey, because why would you have one and not the other? Who does that? We love ourselves down there and we love our food. So we do both. But ham is kind of hard to pair with. And I feel like, just like Dave said, I feel like this would be a beautiful Thanksgiving wine. And in fact, all three of these, because now we're moving into what would go with a big old roast and a big old ribeye. Dave, do you have anything else you wanted to say before we move on to the Staglin? I don't want to cut you off.
No, well, thank you all for doing this. This is fantastic. But I'll let you go. You're the experts here.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, so I literally just looked at the clock here and we are running it a little bit short for Staglin. I don't want to talk over the both of you for these two ones because honestly, yay! All right, he's got the bottle up. Okay, so can we talk about Is there anything else you wanted to say before we move on to that?
We can jump to Staglin. It's a good transition. So
I'm really excited that you make. I'm really excited that you make Resa at Staglin. I think that's like dynamite. I think that's wonderful. And when you say clean cellars, I have never in my life. They are pristine and beautiful and vast and gorgeous. So I'm a big fan of those as well. Staglin, this is our final wine, and we went in order. So let's go just a real quick recap for anybody that's just catching up. We started off with the Artishasic Chardonnay. Thanks, I wrote it down phonetically. I wanted to make sure. Don't you think that this is the La Mer, and it is a beautiful California Chardonnay from Santa Rita Hills that pulls in all that beautiful ocean air. It's got leanness, but it also has a rich mid palate, and it can literally go with absolutely anything. I've now updated it to I want it with both raw scallops and seared scallops. So we've moved on. I'm in multiple categories with this one. And then we just finished up with the 2016 Resa Grenache, which is made by Shannon and Frederick. And Frederick is also, you also make wine together at Staglin, which is our next and final wine. Okay, this is where we talk about family, if that's okay. Staglin, can you, oh my gosh, there's so much to talk about. Can we start with your mom? Can you tell the story of your mom and the bag? And she was like one of the first women doing this. And this wasn't your dad. This was your mom. And she was doing the things. Can we talk about that real fast before we get into the wine? Can you talk about it?
Well, so it was a dream of both of my parents to get into the wine business. They both were first in their families to go to college. My mom grew up in South Dakota. My dad was born in Nebraska, said he had the good sense to leave at 1 and move to Long Beach with his father was originally from Italy, from Calabria. So he learned about wine because wine was always on the dinner table. And my parents met on a blind date at UCLA in the 60s. And then directly after graduating, my dad went into grad school at Stanford. And my parents weren't married yet, but my mom would come and visit him. And on the weekends, they would drive up to Napa. And you know, it was all pretty much farmland then. There were 6 wineries that you could go taste at for free. So it was great for students. And they just fell in love with Napa and said, you know, wouldn't it be great one day if we could buy property here and live here? And so, you know, fast forward to 1985, we were able to purchase this estate. It was a huge kind of leap of financial faith, having no experience in the wine industry, but a love for and a collection of Napa wines and many, many trips here. And so we bought it in 1985, and we discovered after purchasing it that the vines were virused and were going to have to be replanted, which is the norm here in Napa, but that was not a part of the financial plan. And so at that point, my parents had the dream of running the business together, but my dad said, well, I'll keep my job and then you do this. And so my mom went back to school at UC Davis. David Abreu has been our vineyard manager for 36 years now. So he would meet with my mom every Tuesday and, you know, teach her how to drive a tractor and walk the vineyard. And so really kind of started learning from the ground up in 1985. Initially, when we bought the estate, my parents thought, you know, we can't make wine, but we'll grow it and we'll sell it. And so, but that first year they said, you know, we should do something, right? Like we have all of this fruit, like let's try it. And so Bill Harlan was a good friend then. He was in YPO with my dad and still is a friend. And so together they made 1 barrel of Cabernet. And
is there any left of that? Just real fast. Is there any?
There is some 1986. Yeah, not much, but yeah.
Press would like it.
Yeah.
Send me an
I think there might be only 2 cases, so you'll have to arm wrestle me for it. Although actually you might win. So no,
I'm very strong. Yeah. 2 bottles.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, and it kind of turned into what it is today. So she's always historically been the manager or the operator of this business. And we moved up here full time in 1993 after buying it in 85, built the home, and then, replanted the vineyard in phases. We built our winery, completed that in 2001. So we made our wine in custom crush facilities from 1986. First one was Sunny St. Helena, owned by Bill Harlan, which is now Maryvale. And we were at Hess, we were at Sinsky 1 year. So we definitely bounced around and ended at Napa Wine Company when they first started in the 90s. So our first winemakers were, Bob
Kathy
Levy.
Corison.
Kathy made it in '89, I think it was. Celia Welch took over from there and did basically throughout the '90s. So, but yeah, we've had amazing winemakers that have been a part of our project here. So we're very thankful for all of those great relationships.
Literally when I first got to press, which was almost 2 years ago, Amanda McCrossan told me that what I should do is to figure out at that point, like right now we have 936 different Cabernets on our wine list tonight. So when you're coming from the East Coast and you want to learn more about Napa, that's a lot. It's a lot. You know, you show up, you're like, yeah, I know a good amount about Napa. You know 12 wines. You know 12 wines from the East Coast. You know 12 of them.
Yeah.
And what she said, and it was really smart, is she goes, follow the winemakers in Napa. And that was like this. I started to make like a flow chart, and it could have been, that should actually be on the map behind us. It should be like Celia Welch and Staglin and Scarecrow, and that would be the one to do.
Yeah.
But I literally, the one place that I had a note card for that was based on not the winemaker, but the winery was Staglin. Because I was like, look at all these people that have worked here, you know, and it helps to sell wine when you're like, okay, oh, you like this? Well, did you know that this vintage was made by this person? And no, of course, no one knows that. They come to Napa so you could tell them that. Yeah. But it's nice to know. Staglin, so can we talk about Rutherford, the Rutherford bench, Rutherford dust? Because people hear it, and I don't know if they know what that is, but this is it. It is right here in this glass. And I'm not imagining it, right?
Yeah, no, it's definitely there. So Andre, we'll go back and do a quick history lesson. So Andre Chelachev was the original winemaker for Beaulieu Vineyards, and he was brought by George de la Tour to the Napa Valley, and he's the one that introduced Bordeaux varietals to Napa Valley. And he rediscovered our property as a vineyard estate in the 60s. So vines were originally planted here in the 1860s, torn out at Prohibition, and then replanted in the 1960s. And it was the great-granddaughter of George de la Tour, Dagmar Dupin, and her husband, Walter Sullivan, that purchased the estate and then planted vines back on it under the guidance and tutelage of Andre Chelachev. And it was a fruit source for their reserve label, also called George de la Tour, from the 60s through 1985 when we bought it. And so Chelachev uses the term, he coined the term Rutherford dust. And to me, it's less about earth, even though there are earthy notes in this wine. It's more about the tannin structure that you get from the Rutherford bench, from the alluvial fan that's eroded off of the mountains above us for hundreds of thousands of years. And the soils here are very deep and very fine grained. And the tannin structure here, you have very soft, fine grained tannin there for structure, right? And so I think that's how I interpret Rutherford dust versus like earth, right?
Yep. And also, if I can point out, Andre Chelachev's a big hero of mine. The other thing that he brought, besides Bordeaux varietals, and I'm pretty sure I have this right, was like, hey guys, clean a barrel. Did you want to clean your winery? Because that's why you're getting all this bread. And also, malolactic fermentation is your friend. You need that, so do that. And also, maybe not redwood. Can we get some French oak in here? Thanks so much. Love Andre Chelachev. And he comes up all the time. He did everything. He went to Storybook Mountain and told Dr. Jerry Sepp, like, all Zinfandel except for that one spot. Every time we go on a winery visit, and I think we're at 136 in the past year and a half, he comes up. And I don't know, one day I'm gonna have a statue for him somewhere, next to the one of Stevie Nicks, but that's another story.
Not just here in Napa. So I worked to harvest at Ornellaia, and he's the one that said to plant Merlot where Masetto is.
That's right.
I don't know if or not. Yeah.
I think we talked about that the very last one I did with Antica, and see this guy. And I also heard the story was that George de la Tour went over to France and he said, I want your most promising young French wine student. And they said, it's an older Russian guy. And he said, fine, I'll take that one too. Let's go. So, high five. So these wines, like, there's so much to say about Staglin. And I know that we have like 4 seconds left essentially in this, but your mom and your dad are two of the most beautiful people I've ever met in my life. First of all, they're the most authentic people ever. And I love when we do events like with music for brain health. And I love how she always talks to you and your brother literally like you're 8. Shannon, come over here and talk about the wine. And it's my favorite thing, and I can't love her anymore. And when she comes here, she goes, bring me that happy Somm. And I think she means me, which is great because I'm only happy when I see her, maybe, is that the case? These wines are so, this is what Napa Cab is all about. And I feel like sometimes there's a tendency for people to think that they know what a wine tastes like because they hear it a lot. Like, oh yeah, Staglin, yeah, Staglin. When was the last time you tasted Staglin? Like, this is absolutely gorgeous. It's got exactly what you said, those beautiful fine grained tannins. It's got fruit, it's got structure. The aroma on this is mouth watering. I took one sip of this since we've talked. The finish keeps going, and it finishes on both that bright fruit, the acidity, which is not a bad word. That's the lift. That's the salt of the food, is the acidity in the wine, and also those fine grained tannins. And what happens a lot is people come to Napa and they try 47 cabs, and it literally sits on top of your palate. This does not. This actually is one of the few cabs that refreshes your palate because the tannins aren't sitting there weighing it down. I'm not desperate for champagne after drinking this. And that's what usually happens in Napa.
Thank you. Yeah.
What is, I mean, pairing wise, this is just for the fans. It's just for like Facebook and the people, because if you don't have this in front of you, you need to know what you would want with this. This is a big, I want you to think about this. This is a big, juicy ribeye. The end. What else do you need with this? Done. I wanted to say side items, but like what? Like, what do you want with this? Sauteed mushrooms? Sure.
Mm-hmm.
What else though? Like, this is, it's a contemplative wine in the sense that, like, I don't want to chug this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's good and bad because, you know, I don't know if we're gonna get to a second bottle, but also I'm not trying to drink this to drink it. I want to spend some time with this wine. And I do, and we love these wines here. And
Jodi, you know what I think what Darren and Sherry were able to do is, first they were able to find a really special site, and then after that they were able to build a very talented, dedicated, and educated team, many of whom have been here at least 20 or 30 years. Then they basically had a commitment to organic and sustainable farming to the point of getting certified, and also built their home on the property. So to basically say that we're going to be here every day, and we're not just going to be family owned, but we're going to be family run. So I think those are the things that when I look at Darren and Sherry, that I respect quite a bit, you know, because if you talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. And I think there's a lot of new wines coming out, I mean, including mine, right? Like, but everyone you have to earn that path. You have to earn that respect, you know, and how do you earn it? By consistent quality year after year, no excuses. This vintage, that vintage, whatever the case. That's how you get a big name. You get a big name by putting quality in the glass year after year. And that's what a release is, right? A release means that you're going to buy the wine without tasting it. So how do you do that? You do that based on the reputation and the commitment of the organization. So 100%. That's one thing that I think they've really taught me, and I've gotten a big jump ahead on my project by just understanding the mentality of that.
And it's true. And especially when you're doing organic viticulture in Napa, it's here, but it's not like it is in a lot of other places. It's hard. It's expensive. The certifications are rough. If something happens, if God forbid there's a vector and there's an insect, well, guess what? That's your loss, because you've already made the commitment that we're doing what we need to do to make sure that what's in this bottle is not only delicious, not only well made, but it's healthy. And that's important. And that's what you get when you're working with a family company. I mean, their grandchildren are on premise. You're there every day. You're the president. You know what I mean? And we've done 3 beautiful wines today. Thank you so much, Artie and Shannon. This has been a beautiful radar cellar. I really hope you have the wines in front of you if you're joining us. And if not, buy them. Come to Napa, go to Staglin, meet these people, come to press, drink the wines. And like you said, we literally, I don't think I've ever tasted a Staglin before I've just bought it. It's one of the few that you're like, send it. We don't need to come over and try the bottle. We don't need to sample out. I'm selling it. It's going to be good. I'm not worried one bit. Thank you everybody for joining us. This has been a beautiful, beautiful day in Napa. We didn't really get to talk about the vintage very much. That'll be another talk for next time. Thank you for joining us. You can buy the wines on Benchmark after. Anything you want to say before we close up, guys?
Yeah, thank you to Benchmark Wine Group for putting this together, and what they've done in our community as well. I remember attending several very special sine qua non tastings that they put on, and they're always a big pillar of this community. So thank you to Benchmark. Jodi, thank you, your team at Press. You guys are in there every night, grinding it out, making it happen, and making it look good. I know I've been there before. I did it for 20 years, so thank you for doing that, and to my lovely wife for being a harvest widow. And harvest is ending now, so we're gonna get to spend more time together.
Come to press, and we'll drink some wine together. And you guys too that are watching. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.